Hello, everyone. Welcome to the third episode of our podcast. Actually, has a name now.
Yep.
Building Foodtech podcast. We're going to continue on with our series of just kind of providing more primer information so that if you hear a term in a future episode, you're not sure about what it is or a topic or a theme, you can just come back and reference it. So this episode, we're really going to be focusing on food tech and just discussions about the industry in general. But before we actually get to the specifics of food tech, there's actually a news article that was just released through Crunchbase recently, and I wanted to get Brad's take on it, right? It was discussing indoor vertical farming, which you discussed in the ag tech episode last week, and really, there were a bunch of different insights that came from the article. Brad, do you want to go into that?
Yeah. The article came out and touched on a lot of the things that we had talked about in the last episode, and a lot of the companies that I was thinking about when we were having that discussion. And I think the article was to the tune of, funding for vertical farming has dried up, but, vertical farm companies are planting seeds to that extent. And if you go through that list of companies, they highlight Plenty because Plenty is a company that's raised the most amount of money and it's Crunchbase, so, that makes sense. And it's pretty astounding. The company's raised, I think, just south of $1 billion in its life, right. Which is pretty astounding. And goes through the list of what they call the unicorn herd from vertical farming, and it's one of those things where, to my mind, the delineation was pretty clear. So if you go through that list, you've got a few that are flourishing, so like you got Little Leaf, I'll call it Gotham Greens, a couple of these others, and then you've got the lesser, like Plenty is still a big question mark. They've announced in that article, they announced a joint venture in the Middle East, which there's been some articles written. It's actually the second or third time they've announced a expansion into the Middle East that hasn't quite materialized yet. So TBD if that works out. But to me, it was the business model and the focus mismatch that we talked about last time. So like you look at like a Little Leaf Farms, which is Massachusetts based, which is fantastic. A Gotham Greens, that own the fact that their business model is selling lettuce to consumers and are competing, understand the market they're competing in. When you look at some of the other companies that are on the list that no longer exist, be it like an App Harvest, which I think was number 2 on the list, Arrow Farms, a few of the others that have now ceased operations, or gone bankrupt. There was a lack of identity of, do they grow lettuce to sell it, or are they a technology company? And it's a big debate that's happened within vertical farming in the sort of ag tech space of, are you a grower or are you a tech company? And, it's very difficult to fund, execute, grow, and build both at the same time. And that, to me, was kind of the takeaway from that list. At some point, I'd love to go through the list and be like, wow, here, it could dissect it and tell stories till I was blue in the face, but that's not the best use of time. But then it's encouraging because there is that next generation of vertical farming companies that, I don't think the article gave as much love to, who they said are planting seeds,
right?
Mostly because I don't think those have materialized yet. They're still working through the old guard.
Yeah. And I think that one of the things that we often talk about these technical transformations, right? This is obviously farms. It's a very infrastructure heavy, right? Not just from physical real estate, but also just the, creating the building, the robotics, whatever systems that they want to produce in it, right? There seemed to be kind of, to me at least, a lack of the quote unquote pickaxes and shovels of this business. At least ones that are not just tech. Generic ones, right? Like NVIDIA probably won no matter what in this, right? But, in terms of who is building the pickaxes and shovels for indoor vertical farming, right? It didn't seem like there was necessarily a player in that space, right? Someone who's providing a traditional enterprise SaaS offering for that, or, and maybe it's because the industry was so new, but it just seemed like some of those building blocks, right? We kind of rushed straight in to get the full, farm over there, farm indoors, let's go. Maybe there should have been some incremental growth. I don't know. That's just kind of my view. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I I think directionally it's accurate, and I think the way I would interpret it is a lot of the companies that got built, they were a grower and a tech company, and we're going to do everything themselves in-house. And so that's not, in my opinion, the true mentality of a tech company. Like where you focus on your application, your user, your problem set. And if you don't need to build a whole back end, don't do it, kind of thing. And a lot of the companies said, hey, we're going to build from scratch, without a real eye towards, why are we doing that? Do we need to be doing that? Admittedly, there was a time and a place for it. Again, freight farms fell squarely into that, where, I fought it tooth and nail on a lot of the elements that we, invented and built, because, I was like, I want to get it from somewhere else. Can I find that supplier? Can I find that pickaxe or something like that? It didn't exist, which is the nature of being early, but what was interesting, if you look at the examples of what I consider good vertical farm companies that I called out, be it a Little Leaf or a Gotham Greens, they owned that real, what I consider the tech mentality of, all right, there are pieces of tech that may not be sexy, may not be brand new, but they work. And so how can we apply and bring in the latest and newest from a technology perspective to make it a better business and have a better offering? And those are the ones I think that are winning. And so it's just a matter of, trying to do everything all at once. And, I think that was part of the downfall of the pitch, is that we're going to be the ultimate tech player that no one else can recreate. And then we're somehow going to grow a head of lettuce better, faster, cheaper, and be able to distribute it more efficiently than all the big players out there. It's a lot to take on.
Right. And I think, it's like a startup fundamentals, right? Boiling the ocean. And maybe some, venture capital, companies that receive venture capital, they're kind of, maybe they're in that mindset that they are going to be there. They have the backing to be able to do it, right? But we go back to the startup fundamentals, right?
Yeah.
You got to start somewhere.
Yeah, and I think...
Work your way up.
I think when they talk about in that article, planting the new seeds, the new seeds are gonna be just much stronger companies. So you have to remember when the Plenties, the App Harvests of the world, Aerofarms, etc., started around the same time that a Freight Farms did, or a lot of them actually after. When you pitch a huge vision, you bring some lettuce to Massason, and you're asking for 40 million, and he says, I'm giving you 150. And so it's this idea of you die from indigestion because you're trying to find a place for all this capital and meet these expectations that don't quite fit the business model. And it's something that's called out in the article too. Is vertical farming truly a venture backable space? Yeah. And that's a question that I ponder from time to time, but
it's a good question, because obviously I feel like anybody who goes into this space is probably a sophisticated business person, presumably, and to be able to raise this much money. And so, some of the lessons that we've learned over the years, I'm sure someone thought of potential franchise model, right? Own the real estate, not the actual farm, in a way, right?
Yeah.
But I think that there's potentially, maybe it's not even it shouldn't have been vertical farming. It should have been more bioengineering, more genetic engineering of plants to actually enable them to flourish indoors, right? To make it so that, they're more bountiful indoors. They're bred specifically for the indoor environment and whatever's most conducive to that.
Yeah.
So I wonder if that might be a potential direction for the future.
Yeah. I think what this article highlighted to me is that the time that these companies were established and we're trying to figure out how do we scale, we took venture capital, now what? Right. The market wasn't defined enough. So everybody was trying to do a little bit of everything to try and find that golden path to, triple, double, and get the return. But there the difference between like a restaurant franchise or something like that, where there's an established market, there's sort of a formula for foot traffic, location, all these other things, and then it's a matter of like, can you come up with a new unique concept that speaks to that generation in a particular way, that is a big market that maybe people haven't seen or tapped into yet. Lettuce is kind of an established market. Like, foot traffic doesn't matter. Everybody's just looking for the lowest price. Quality is like, you want quality, but not always. So it's a very different game that, the players that do it well in the conventional way, they don't try to differentiate. There's no branded lettuce. These fresh products just are, commodity products for a reason, where like there's no value add to a branded, lettuce or apple. I mean, people are going to try, people are going to keep trying, and there'll be pockets where it works, but that wasn't proven, that wasn't established, and the different areas to attack just aren't quite known yet, I think.
And I think, like, even with an industry that's high flying like that, I think that there are potential like dangers, just like how lab grown meat gets demonized at some point, right? And I feel like, maybe there is going to be some demonizing it, or if it was wholly hugely successful. Hey, lettuce grown indoors, there's some problems with it. Or, you ate lettuce that was indoors, never saw the sun, type of thing. So I'm sure that's like, I see that there's like a bunch of different potential issues there. I think that when we look at the situation, right, and maybe the article didn't get to this part yet, and I think that might be something that, we'd like to fill in the blank of, is, we kind of look at the different parts of the cycle, right? And right now, obviously, it feels like in vertical farming, we're in the trough of despair.
Sure.
Right?
Yep.
And, you noted that there are some players who are still active, and some who, the jury's still out.
Right.
If we look at it, do you think that, just like in other industries, like in the internet, like Amazon rises from the ashes of the dot-com bust to become an incredible dominant company. Do you see the same thing happening here? Do you think that maybe there's some new entrants that'll come in and learn about all the mistakes, and especially some of the stuff that we've detailed today, and they're going to forge their own path and actually find the right way by seeing all the other people who, ostensibly lit a bunch of money on fire, right? Kind of
no, I think it's inevitable, it's market dynamics at its finest, like it's Darwinism, whatever you want to call it, where those that can last survive and have the opportunity to thrive. And is there a chance that one of those players from the unicorn herd from the article, survive and come through the other side and find out, especially when there's way less competition, everyone in the indoor space is not trying to compete on price and get people off shelves? Is that possible? Yes. I don't know if the tailwinds, like in Amazon as an example, that was immense skill and management, and obviously it's a phenomenal company and a juggernaut, we all know that, but there's a certain amount of timing luck that comes into it, of Bezos getting a bunch of capital right into the company right before kind of the whole market, totally crumbled in 99, and then being able to sweep up the bits, but the internet trend was still there. That idea of more and more people every day were getting on the internet, more and more people are shopping on the internet. So the market was just accelerating regardless of the dot-com crash. Whereas vertical farming and the food market, doesn't have that same kind of tailwind behind it. It's pretty steady. It's going to maintain, but you don't have that massive growth, that huge wave to ride. That it's just a matter of, okay, now there's less competition to capture some of that. It's just it's not there in the food space of vertical farming. So it's possible. I believe it will happen. I do think a couple of the old guard in that that list and from back in the day are going to make it through if they can survive to thrive. The ones that survive are going to have the opportunity to really do some special things through these next 6-12 months, I hope. But the new entrants are going to be really exciting because there's a lot to learn.
And you still think that there's space?
Oh yeah, 100%. It's you look at it. There's iterations of every market. And so I've been thinking about this more in terms of like, where's the fundamental disruption? Where, there was a huge market in like some music, like in cassettes. It's like, oh my God, cassettes, they ruined it, they destroyed the record. And CDs come along, you're like, these are awesome. But like the real sort of complete change in the game was streaming, and where like a physical medium kind of goes away for music. And that changed everything about the music industry, whereas like that hasn't happened in food yet. And that's going to be some combination of all the things you talked about, like bioengineering, hardware, software, a new market model that kind of comes together. Again, right place, right time, right environment.
And one of the things that I always wondered about was this kind of food direct to the front door, right?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe this is kind of transitioning into our food tech discussion here,
sure.
Right? You have your Blue Aprons, your Hello Freshes, those types of like meal order kits direct to your home, right? And then you see like vertical farming and like farm to table as being like a huge thing. Just wondering like why did those never converge? Like those two things coming together. I don't know if you saw that within the industry, or were there any particular reasons? Or
Yeah, I think twofold. Like one hadn't happened yet, and one just doesn't make sense. And so like meal kits, in my opinion, fundamentally, like you've got ready to eat meals, like they eat and serve. You throw them in the microwave, or they're ready to go. Those are super convenient. Probably not the most cost-effective way to, but you're not eating out. So it's a step down there. A meal kit is kind of all the same work of cooking, but it's not as cheap as buying groceries.
Right.
And it's not as convenient as a ready-to-eat meal.
Stuffers.
So you're like, and so what we've seen is the ready-to-eat meal space has exploded and continued to grow with better for you, better sourced, better created options, not just the stofers. And so that's like, that's very convenient, not the most cost effective, but I'm paying for convenience. The meal kit, not as convenient, costs a little more. If I want to cook, I can just go grocery shopping. And there's a lot of tools that have enabled that. And the other piece was just the distribution logistics of a meal kit are really, 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 really difficult.
Yeah.
And this is what we saw, and was part of why I started Morrissey, is that watching companies that got to a certain level of scale and sophistication of moving perishable pieces around, and then being like, we did it when we owned our own warehouse in the Bay Area. And we're crushing it. Look at our retention metrics, look at it, our CAC to LTV, all these other things are phenomenal, and our cost of goods are perfect, and this is great. Let's scale it to 10 cities, ready, set, go.
Yeah.
The anticipation was that there was a whole infrastructure market to just scale in. Or, worse yet, we can just raise, $200 million per market to build a warehouse, to hire trucks, to do all these things that like, you're a venture capitalist, you're like, I don't want to invest hundreds of millions of dollars for you to put steel on the ground. And so that was a flaw there. And then when it comes to, direct to doorstep from farms, that there's a new one, not so much this last couple of years, but for a while there was 2 to 3 a year that were getting started. It was like, no, we figured out a new way to utilize technology, so on and so forth. But it's such a human dependent business. You're dependent, that has variables behind it. So weather variables, crop variables, all these other things. And then you've got a farmer, and then you've got a consumer on the other side. And there's not really no thought to, but the hard part there, again, is distribution. Of like, we know that the trend is there. People want healthier, local, fresh, whole foods. And that's going to continue. That's a huge macro trend that just keeps going. Farmers want to grow more food, want to get more out there, but if there's not an efficient economical way for them to connect, the physical element, like digitally you can connect, that's easy because the supply and the demand are there and both looking to grow. It's the actual physical connection of a perishable item, which that's where things fall down. There are some really interesting initiatives. So the World Wildlife Fund, if you don't know, which why would you? Because it's the World Wildlife Fund. They've got a really good sort of like innovation director. Her name's Julia. It's Julia, yes. Or Julie. No, Julia. I'll check that. But she's phenomenal. So apologies for getting your name wrong if I did. But I talked to her 4 or 5 years ago because the World Wildlife Fund was looking at, can we solve this? And my position was still the same that it is today, that it's a distribution problem. Mm-hmm. So they looked at and partnering with the USPS, which has trucks, has drivers, has, to do almost like real time, like, hey, you can pick up at a farm rurally and get it to the surrounding community same day. It's taken five years, give or take, but if you check it out, it's called Farmers Post, I believe. They're actually piloting it in a few different places, which to me is super exciting because it's the exact same concept that I've been banging the drum on for the last couple of years with Morrissey is utilize the infrastructure. Farmers Post could probably do a better job of applying technology to that solution, but reach out. That's what Morrissey is all about. But that's a great use of the USPS, all the infrastructure. 100, however old the post office is. Since the Pony Express, like the investment of infrastructure there, and people who care about what they do, utilizing it to connect food and people. There's something powerful there. It's going to be a little bit before we get it right.
So I think that just to wrap it all neatly in a bow, I think that to your opinion here, right, it's the distribution that's a major weak point and vulnerability. And so for a lot of these vertical farms and trying to get food meal kits and all that type of stuff, what is like a distinct web of different options and supply chain, players.
Yep.
Distribution is definitely something that needs to be worked on in the future.
Yeah. And so you put a really nice bow on it, which actually gives me a good, I think, example and shout out to a local company. So, name checking Little Leaf Farms once again. But they're an example of a company that utilized existing technology in the greenhouse, applied technology, knew the exact business they were going to run from day one, had all the right people to run that business, and they understood the limitations. So they control their own distribution. So from day one, they were like, we're going to have trucks, we're going to target, retail, grocery, all of that, which has enabled them to build a solid foundation of a business where now they have one of my favorite products, which is they have salad kits. So it's this, and like what I love about it is if you go to the store, check it out, not paid by Little Leaf, but definitely get one. It's the same clamshell they get for their small salad, but it has like 3/4 of the lettuce, the blends, the various blends they have, which are great. It's hydroponic lettuce, just superior product. Then they've got a Caesar mix, they've got a Southwest mix, where again, it just gets dropped in, same thing, gets put in the same slot, in their current distribution. And I guarantee what I pay versus what it costs them, they know, and it becomes a value add product that has a way to brand a commodity product like a lettuce. I see them as a shining example of what to do, like focus on the fundamentals, build a business that applies technology appropriately, and then kind of find your wedge for that high margin, kind of branded, differentiated product.
I think that's really like a good message, especially for like founders who are looking to work in this space, and then also just people who are working in this space to kind of think about what the next path forward is. So kind of transition into our discussion today about food tech. Yeah, what's your favorite food, Brett?
My favorite food?
Yeah.
I mean,
it's a nice fun question to start off with.
Yeah, no, I'm gonna be honest with you. Because it's not that interesting.
Don't say kilo.
No. I have a very particular salad that I enjoy, and I probably eat the same thing. My wife makes fun of me because I eat the same thing for dinner like every night if it was up to me. And it's a hydroponic lettuce blend. So I'll go through like Little Leaf, Gotham, Bright Farms, any of my favorites. Bright Farms when I can get it. And my favorite for a long time were the backyard tomatoes, which are hydroponically grown, sort of cocktail tomatoes. A few different cheeses and a blue cheese dressing, and done. I could eat that twice a day, every day, and actually be very happy. But that's my favorite food.
That's awesome. So just like there could be a lot of menu items that you could possibly choose from, there's probably a lot of different things that kind of can be encompassed within the brand or the vertical of food tech, right? There's a lot of different particular areas. If you were to map it out, what would be the different components that go within the food tech industry?
You hit the nail on the head. There's so much that could go into it. Yeah.
Because like even when we were having discussions about like agriculture and vertical farming, honestly, like for me, the vast majority of like ag tech is really oriented towards food, right? And so really they're kind of like when you say like AI solution, ML solution, right? All ML solutions are technically AI solutions, right? They're all under the same school of thought. So, yeah, we're wondering like.
Yeah, I mean, I think it basically comes down to, I would almost say like maybe who your customer is. Because at the end of the day, that's probably the most important question to be asking. And you know, food tech, right or wrong, and I think it's probably broadly correct. You know, is dominated by the big sort of consumer-facing ends of the market. So, like, you know, Toast, for example, great local Boston company, you know, phenomenal outfit, you know, done an amazing job. That's food tech. You know, it's enabling restaurants, you know, to transact around food. Delivery was the, you know, in terms of like dollars put into food tech for a number of years there, it was inflating everything because there was so much going directly into delivery, rapid delivery, 5 minute, 10 minute, 1 minute, you know, 3 minutes ago delivery kind of thing. But I think, yeah, it kind of comes down to like, there's that very customer end, and then all the way back to that ag input, you know, everything from like soil inputs to crop inputs, fertilizers, then, you know, robotics, automation, you know, pest and weed back there, like all the way into seed. So it's really from like seed to plate, which like, that's a lot. And so, you know, the food tech maps that you see are sometimes hard to even fathom. And there's no way to get it right just because there's so much in there. You know, it becomes a definition like vertical SaaS. It's like, okay, like that's a category of businesses and it could mean anything. You know, food tech is kind of the same, where then you have to specialize.
So I remember like a distinct trend because you were just talking about deliveries, right? And that's your like Instacart, your Uber Eats, and whatever. But I also remember like Travis Kalanick working on ghost kitchens, trying to make ghost kitchens into a thing. What happened to that? Like, not doesn't feel like it's really taken off as well as it should be.
Yeah, I mean, I think like a lot of businesses, it had, you know, it almost had a false positive with the pandemic. You know, where there was just everything just was in upheaval. So like a ghost kitchen that, you know, could somehow not require people to come in and out, you know, because people were like, I'm not going in there. There's no need to build seating for eating and all that. It made a lot of sense in that moment. And I think there's some fundamentals to it. Like it becomes in my mind, a reinvention of the same model that's worked for so many different franchise restaurants, where every restaurant that is multi-unit gets to the same point at a certain point in scale where they have a commissary kitchen. It's hub and spoke. You know, but for a ghost kitchen, the hub is the ghost kitchen and the spokes just don't have a brick and mortar outlet. It just relies on those delivery rails that have been put in place. So the spokes are more direct. So you cut out the final brick and mortar, you know, shop where people would place their order and pick it up.
So like looking back at that, and we were talking a lot about vertical farms and all these different types of things. You had mentioned, right, that distribution is like something that you identified as being highly critical. And would you say like, given that's a thing that you'd want to see solved, right, and for more people to be working in that, what should like the future direction of food tech be in like, you know, how investors are framing things and how founders should be building, you know, like within distribution, what should people be thinking about?
It's a good question. I mean, I think to me, it's always what's the future state of the industry. So that's why my bent is very heavily towards the fact that we need and the world is moving towards whole, healthy, fresh food. And so when it comes to distribution and innovation there, I would want to see all energy focused in that space to make every part of that better, you know, and less towards the shelf-stable CPG, you know, branded items. You know, given there's a lot more money, a lot more margin in CPG products than there are in, you know, fresh, healthy food. That's where the friction is, and so. But there is so much opportunity in the space. And I was just out in California, whatever it was, last week, and got to sit with a number of different food distributors from around the country, who run phenomenal businesses, have great relationships with growers, phenomenal relationships with the community. And these are businesses that, have 100,000, 200,000 square feet of highly modern equipment and infrastructure for handling fresh perishable foods, and it's spreadsheets stacked on spreadsheets stacked on spreadsheets, to run the day-to-day operations. And to me, that's red meat. I'm in there, we're building Morrissey. I'm like, if we could eliminate all of those spreadsheets and take all of this inefficiency, all this error-prone sort of human moving of data around, it's not a heavy lift from a technical perspective, but that's the red meat. So I think that's where the big wins come in distribution. Again, it's just age old. If you're going to go venture, if you're going to go growth, you can't, in my opinion, be investing in and building, physical infrastructure. The capital doesn't match to that. There are instances, and I'll be wrong here, I'll be happy to, but then that capital has to be more patient, more hard tech, more there's a whole ecosystem of hard tech and, venture capitalists, patient capital, things like that, that are looking for those really hard problems that require a physical element, like here in Boston, like the engine, like what they're looking at, and so I think the innovation there is, just unleashing the potential of the existing sort of infrastructure, distribution, supply chain, because the supply chain it's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but there are parts of it that are really close to it, and it's a matter of just connecting those. And I think that's where applying technology, bringing a new thought to the market, and how to bring that to the masses will really be a game changer.
So let's say, for example, the engine, but there's also a lot of other VCs, right? Mm-hmm. When they look at food tech and they look at a food tech company, and we were just talking about VCs pouring money into vertical farms, right? Mm-hmm. But if we want more people to be building in the distribution space, what should be the key metrics that investors look at and should clue in on? Hey, this is a good, worthwhile company that's going to be venture scalable in distribution.
I don't know if I'm equipped to answer that question. Mostly because I've always been a founder, so I've never really sat on the investor side of the table. And I think there almost needs to be a fundamental divide between the founder and the investor, where the founder, you're tasked with the idea of, I see a future that I believe will exist. Mm-hmm. What do I do to accelerate that future and extract value from the way I build it? And I don't know how an investor thinks about that, but I know there are firms that are developing specific thesis around supply chain and around, distribution being a part of that. Yeah. I guess I would say, if you're going to see the outsized success and find the outliers, and you're investing in supply chain distribution and whatnot, the old mentality won't really work, where strict rules of we don't touch the physical world, don't do it, you even hinted that you will, don't do it. Now, caveat to what I just said, $100 million to build a warehouse or something, big no, but not being afraid to interact with the physical world is a superpower, is a strength. Whereas, the history of investing in sort of distribution supply chain has been, how can we avoid touching the physical at all?
What's really interesting is there was a lot of money also being poured in, American dynamism and reshoring. And I was just having a conversation with someone who was working in the chip manufacturing space and talking about, obviously Intel's going through a bit of trouble recently, and they're going to be laying off 15,000 people. It's just the news today. And, obviously it's a big scale back in their operations. They're cutting their dividend. Things are not going great for domestic American chip making.
Sure.
I wonder, with food, has there been any pushback against globalism in some way, that like American dynamism and that kind of trend that's gonna just increase over time leads to potential opportunities in the food tech space of reshoring, production. I think that in America, honestly, like I don't think like farming left that much, but perhaps, whether it's getting fruits in a certain country or, all those types of things, like just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
I don't think the food system in the country has been that dramatically impacted by like being so global, and then this American dynamism, like bringing things back on shore. Like there's a lot of farmland in the country, like sure, should or could more of it be directed towards growing actual food we eat, not like feedstock and fuel, different discussion. But like, yes, farming still exists because it's conventional farming is so, land-based and resource-based. And like, let's face it, like, the United States has a lot of great resources for farming. And so that would never really leave. And I think the thing is, we've been trying to bring food production local and more local and more local and more local for what, 20 years now? And like we've made progress, like, between like local farms, regional farms, indoor farms, all those things. We've made progress, but we haven't really made a dent. And that's been a concerted effort over 20 years. Like at the end of the day, it kind of comes down to the consumer where, you're in Boston, you eat into Sweetgreen, you want a salad in February. You're not going to not have a salad in February if that's what you want, because like you don't get local lettuce, or there's no, lettuce production, in the United States. Like fortunately, like lettuce is a great example of a crop that is, very localized, like where I was last week in like the Salinas Valley area, and then like production will move to Yuma, Arizona, right, to sort of follow the weather pattern. But I just don't think the system has changed that much. And I think almost like the countries that we're trying to get away from, they, other than a few products that are more on like the huge commodity grains, rices, things like that, that I'm not as well versed in, true food products, haven't been a big producer for us. And so it's not that big of a change.
It's a good point. Yeah. Because obviously it's a big movement across the United States to reshore stuff, but I think, from what I'm hearing, like our food system's pretty resilient, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's like talking to the food distributors last week, and got into a couple of, when I do the thing, you go out for drinks with a few of these characters, and they start swapping stories about the pandemic. And what I loved about it is it was a point of pride for them that they're like, the whole world shut down. Everybody else, like the supply chain was a disaster. Like, you could get a ton of this, you couldn't get that, you couldn't get this. And they were like, we were getting it done. You're getting food in, they had food. They ended up, a lot of them shifted to like the USDA farm to family boxes, that sort of program, because they could get it done. And it was a huge point of pride that they know what they're doing and have such vast and multitude of connections throughout the country and really the globe. They can still get it done in the midst of a global pandemic and like a supply chain disaster across the board.
I think that some of the things that we also want to look at, right, when we talk about like supply chain and some of those things, some of that kind of touches government, right? And obviously, as founders in tech, sometimes we run for the regulatory boogeyman, worrying about like Bill Gurley, worrying about regulatory capture, right? In your view of the industry, and especially, since you're kind of pounding the table on distribution, are there any regulatory hurdles that are in the space that we need to address and potentially like deal with technology and with other techniques that we need to get around? Or do you think the regulatory environment it's not a factor?
I would say I'm so bad with like policy and regulation, which again, it's like, wow, like it's been nice to build a team around me that as we deal with food as medicine, because that's not that's not how my brain works. So it's nice to have people around me who really, can really get into that. I think the biggest difference, the most shocking thing that I've seen in the food space that directly impacts me, and it bothers me day to day, is really around food safety and documentation there. And by that, what I mean is the level of scrutiny, licensing, and regulation to make sure that food is food safe on the retail grocery side of the equation is shockingly non-existent compared to like when I work with these institutional food distributors, and they're like, okay, like, you know, food safety, this is how we think about it. And it's, you know, 3 people full time, like a whole room of documentation that, you know, they, you know, needs to be ready to audit a head of lettuce at a moment's notice. You know, whereas that doesn't really exist on the retail side, which when I found that out was very much shocking to me. And it was actually someone of my co-founder, she sort of schooled me to, because I was like, how is that possible? Like, it's food safety. It should just be table stakes. And, you know, there's been enough issues, you know, like a guy I respect a lot, this guy Darren Detweiler, he's written a few books on food safety. He's out of Northeastern. You know, there's been enough incidents and enough deaths in food safety that it should just be a universal truth, and it's just not. And you know, it bothers me, and mostly it's because the food distributors in the institutional side have just kind of evolved as a fragmented, disconnected industry that doesn't lobby for itself on Capitol Hill. Doesn't have a lobbying arm, you know, until probably the last 10 years. Whereas the retailers, you know, they knew what they were doing. They're like, invest in lobbying, invest in regulation, you know, and protect yourselves there. So I think there's definitely a litany of opportunity to fix that and to make some changes. I just don't really have the patience for it to really even attack that vector. And to me, it's like, you know, I don't know. I just don't see it a worthy use of my time or a startup's time to try and, like, you know, change regulation. You know, it's our job to sort of find a way through it, around it, or break it down and then figure it out later.
But it doesn't sound like it's necessarily an inhibitor.
No. I would, you know, it's not a true inhibitor. Like, it's not a taxi and Uber situation, you know, where you're like, you know, somebody's gonna be like, well, there's laws that say you can't do that. Right. You know, regulation that says you can't do that, and you gotta say, I'm gonna do it anyway. We don't have that, you know, by and large. It's just mostly, you know, it's out of date. And so it's gonna have to catch up at some point. But I mean, that's true of almost every piece of tech and every you know, innovation. It's like regulation has to catch up.
You know, when you're talking about like food safety and food quality and that type of stuff, honestly, like anecdotally speaking, right? Like going back to my parents' home, they live near a city outside of Lawrence, Massachusetts, right? Just outside, like one of the suburbs. And, you know, there's this favorite Vietnamese like market, almost like a, you know, their Vietnamese version of bodega, essentially, right? Corner store. Yep. You go in, my dad's like rifling through some fruit, and he's like, oh, this bunch is rotten. Yep. Like, literally just rotten food that's just kind of left out in the space, right? Yeah. And it's just like, well, that seems like wholly unacceptable, that there's just like mold growing on certain things that are left out in the shop. And I'm like, ugh, right? Yeah. And so that definitely does confirm some of the things that I've seen, especially when you're saying on the retail side and in potentially smaller stores, right? Like, look, if their inventory turns over from one day to the next, maybe they don't check it. Yes. You know, it's not in their best interest to, or in their, you know, financial interest to do so. Exactly. Looking at like income levels, right? Obviously, you know, when we talk about like healthier movements, right? Sure. A lot easier for more affluent communities to be able to tackle that. I think that when we look at like the obesity crisis in the United States, studies have shown like that impacts people of like less affluent areas, you know, more often. So when we kind of look at like food security, right, and that was like one of the tenet goals, even from an outsider looking into the food tech industry, right, like food security, trying to make sure that everyone has a meal. You know, high schools and public schools passing laws to, you know, free lunch and free breakfast or whatever that's going across the nation, right? I think that one of the, and you actually wrote a thoughtful LinkedIn post about this, and I'll probably like put it up in a little screenshot, but just donated food solutions. I was having many conversations with different people, and it's honestly a very classic like startup idea for people. Like, my corporate company buys all this food, and we're forced to throw it all out. I wish that there was just someone who's able to pick it up, take it to the shelter, or take it to communities in need. And it seems like so many people have come up with those ideas. So many startups that I've seen pitch over the years in that. But it just seems like it keeps coming up, and if it keeps coming up to me, it means that it hasn't been solved, right? It hasn't penetrated local media, or like that. This is the known thing. Like, there's no established player. So just seeing that, what's been going on with like the donated food space?
Yeah, no, I mean, so the LinkedIn post that I put together, was really around the fact that the donated food model is just fundamentally flawed, and food waste has been a target goal for corporations, for the government, for 20 years, something like that. As long as I can remember, we've been talking about food waste. And so that means there's been entrepreneurs, there's been people, like you said, keep trying different solutions. And the issues are, I'll say, dignity and economics. And so there's a certain level, and there's something wrong with, because somebody can't afford food or, is struggling, that they should get food that is unacceptable to others. Like, that does not feel like I'm getting food with dignity to me. Like, oh, I'm sorry you're having a tough time. Here's a box of stuff that's like half rotten,
right? Or if someone's picked through,
and then you expect the person to say, well, thank you, and like, to a certain extent, like that's degrading to, but that, to me, that's not my area of expertise. What, to me, the fundamental flaw is the economics, in that so many people have been attacking food waste, and all of the players within the supply chain, waste is a problem, and it's an economic problem. Every bit of food that goes to waste, they want it gone because that's a dollar they can't make. And so they've been attacking that problem on the back end, in the middle, through retail, for the last 20, 30 years. And every pound of food that they don't waste means it's one less pound of food that can be donated if that's your model. So we see it all the time, where a donated food model starts with a certain level of quality because they do want to address the fact of dignity, or they're trying to make money on it, or they're like, oh, well, we'll take your donated food and we'll resell it at a discount because we get it for, quote unquote, zero. But then the quality quickly degrades because those ahead of them in the supply chain are saying, well, every piece of food, every pound of food that I waste is lost revenue for me. And I want to eliminate that. It's the economic imperative of their business to eliminate that waste and be more efficient. And so fundamentally, it just doesn't work. And that's why, when it comes to food access, food insecurity, things like that, again, I'm not an expert in that space. I just know the systems and like the ways to do it that I think work. And there's an idea to keep food in the for-profit realm as long as possible, because in the for-profit world, we are solely incentivized on efficiency and the economics of that food. So we don't want any of it to waste. Right. We don't want any quality degradation, and we want it to be the cheapest, fastest, cleanest.
Interesting. If you happen to be an expert, I'd love to have you on the pod and have a further discussion about this. Last off, we've talked a lot about like advancements in the future, so I want to hit that off. So as a kind of a last thing, I thought it would be fun what if I threw out a bunch of different potential like ideas within the food tech space, and we'll play investor pass. Like, pretend, Brad, you get to have unlimited funds to invest into a bunch of fun startups. Okay. But, be mindful of your LPs. Be mindful of the LPs. Sure. Like me, as someone who's like approaching it, as many people who are probably looking at food tech are, someone from outside the industry proposing certain solutions. I think it's good to see what your opinions are, but also like where the conventional knowledge falls short. So an example would be, let's imagine, right, for scenario, autonomous vehicles happen to work. And I have an autonomous van. Could I make an autonomous food truck that just wholly no human involved, but like, being able to like order from Domino's a pizza to my house, like all Domino needs is the autonomous van that drives around a particular residential neighborhood, manufactures the pizza in the vehicle, and then delivers it straight to home. Investor pass.
With that broad a mandate, pass.
Pass. Why?
If it was more specific, so like it could be a pizza, it could be this, you know, it would have to be like almost the idea of we've got a technological advancement that takes this very specific, you know, vending machine type thing.
Gotcha.
You know, and it basically becomes a mobile vending machine where it's like the biggest drawback to this vending machine is that the product is awesome, you know, whatnot, but like imagine if you could just bring this vending machine to people and not have them have to walk through or buy it, you know. You know, and something like that, I would lean forward. I think a broad, you know, there's too many variables in there where if the founder pitched it in that broader realm, I like it as a vision in the future, you know, but like our way to get there is going to be X. Like I'd rather that be tight and wrong than it be broad and we're going to figure it out along the way.
Awesome. Imagine this next scenario.
Okay.
All right, we're talking about distribution, right? Distribution being a major vulnerability. We talked a lot about drone deliveries, right? But let's imagine a world where Elon Musk is more wildly successful than his wildest imagination. SpaceX is actually able to produce at scale rockets.
Sure.
And they're able to make like almost as if it's like airport transportation, like rockets here, rockets go there, everywhere. Right? So would you ever think that given we have indoor farming, right? One of the limitations is the energy cost of lights. What if we were able to leverage the sun out in space and be able to ship food directly downwards to where it's needed that is grown in orbit? Investor pass. Conceivably a startup that's able to do that.
Like I want to say pass. See my previous comments, but you know, if we're in a future state where all of those variables are in the true, you know, they tick over to the true side of the equation. I'd be interested. I think it's compelling. You know, I honestly think the technical innovations that would get us to that state of play would apply themselves in a terrestrial setting, like energy, for instance. Like if there was like a cold fusion or like, you know, miniature nuclear, you know, reactor kind of setup that would most likely allow for that kind of space travel, that would solve a lot of the problems where you would need to be dropping from space or using, you know, orbital sun rays to grow food. So, you know, the journey to get there, I think, would solve a lot of the problems that were just outlined as the problem to solve. But if we did get to that point somehow, then I think I'd be interested.
All right, last scenario. I think this is great. Just being able to like lay out, because like these are probably, you know, maybe ideas that people had floating around their mind. The last one, maybe we'll actually blend into what we're going to be talking about next week, which is more about like food as medicine. Next episode, food as medicine. But really thinking about in terms of like looking at the essential like reason for obesity. Part of it is obviously a big component is socioeconomic, right? But another part is just habit based, right? That like when someone gets stressed, they might stress eat as an example, right? And so looking at potentially leveraging mental health and looking at, you know, in the food as medicine space, thinking about a doctor prescribing you something that you would want to eat, being able to monitor your emotions and being able to tailor a food curriculum or food, you know, bunch of like different types of food options based off of, you know, hey, you're having a rough patch. Well, instead of reaching for your Hershey candy bar, here's some potential options for you. Right? And so just kind of thinking about in that realm, right? Investor pass.
Pass.
Why so?
Food as an application for sort of mental health, I think has a lot of, there's a lot there. Specific to, you know, reaching for comfort food or whatnot. That's not a food issue. That is, you know, that's a habit. That's a, you know, a mental construct to deal with whatever emotions you're having. Now, if you came at me with, okay, like it's proven that when you have a better diet, like the chemical balances within your body are more stable, more reliable, more resilient, and you can deal with stresses, you can deal with changes much better, much more healthy way, which would then impact your ability to sort of process that I'm having these emotions and not go for, you know, that comfort food that you think is, you know, salt making you feel better, but it's really just like, you know, sugar, endorphins, or whatever. That would be really interesting to me, because I think that's a really important problem. It's something that we're seeing, you know, across the obesity and you know, epidemic in the country, you know, especially in younger and younger children, you know, and throughout the population. Like, you know, when your body feels that way, when you're so, you know, completely, you know, technical term, out of whack, you know, with the different foods you're eating, then there's no way for your mental health to be optimal.
So I think some of the interesting like learnings from here, right? Obviously, aside from the fact that I think there's no founder market fit here, I just don't I don't understand food enough to be able to like go like concrete in on a specific example. But I think these are just kind of those like, you know, laying in bed random thoughts that come to your mind that might influence some thinking, right?
Yeah.
And I think that you gave some really good answers for why, like, hey, rubber meets the road, you might be finding some potential issues there, right? So that was really great. Hopefully, trial for the for this. If you have any ideas that you want to pitch our way, I'll be really happy to throw it up again.
No, I mean, I think that's, you know, if I'm able to be helpful with founders at all, it's sort of in that, you know, I'll call it, I hate the term, but like pattern matching, and just matching what I've seen in my experience to the ideas and the approaches that I've talked to founders about. And yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, food is a complex system of systems, and that's the realm that I love. That's the realm I love to play in. And so, you know, helping founders just think through how you match to the most lucrative system within and how to tap into it. I mean, that's really what food is all about. You know, and as we get into food as medicine, you know, I'm constantly fascinated by the litany of opportunity that I can't even articulate yet, as you bring such a complex web and system of systems of food to the ultimate, you know, just rat's nest spaghetti string diagram of system of systems that is healthcare. Like, those two coming together, other than it being like the most mind-twisting mishmash of systems ever, it's really exciting to think about and sort of try to like see the matrix a little bit. But yeah.
So do stay tuned for that coming next week. We'll be having, next episode. We'll be having our discussion about food as medicine and kind of demystifying that very early space, right? And kind of talking about some of the, you know, exciting vision for it, what future technologies are going to be applied towards that space, but also, you know, just some good old-fashioned process innovation, right? We're going to fix some of the piping, if you will, and, you know, look at examining some of the, you know, pickaxes and shovels in that space.
Yeah, it's. I think as we get into food as medicine, it's going to be a lot of unsexy work that gets to some really sexy outcomes. But yeah, got to just be willing to roll up your sleeves and do the boring, unsexy, unflashy stuff to get there.
It's like panning for gold. Gold's not going to be amongst the pretty rocks, right?
Exactly.
So. Thank you so much for watching all the way until the end here. Hopefully you got a lot of value from our great conversation here, a little bit about ag tech, closing the loop around that, discussing food tech and the vast potential that's in that particular industry. And we'll see you all when we get into the conversation about food as medicine. Until next episode. Have a good one, everyone.